Još jednom dobar dan svima. Želim da pozdravim prvo moje saradnike.
Good afternoon. I would like to greet my associates first, because everybody comes and goes, and they're the ones who stay with me. I would also like to greet members of the press, members of the Council of the Governor. I hope you're glad to see us, because we haven't seen each other for 3 months. As usual, we will present our new projections and expectations for the coming period. Before that, however, I would like to look back at the year behind us, a year fraught with challenges and new geopolitical uncertainties that seem to have become characteristic of modern times. Even in such circumstances, we were successful in achieving our objectives and projections from a year ago. Before I elaborate in detail on current macroeconomic developments and our new projections, allow me to present several facts and figures relating to our projections presented here 1 year ago. Back in February last year, when inflation was just shy of its peak, I pointed out that it would be halved in late 2023. This has materialized, with end 2023 year-on-year inflation at 7.6%. Back then, as now, we expected inflation to retreat within the target tolerance band by mid-2024. Consistent with our expectations, GDP growth picked up speed in the second half of 2023, and real growth measured 2.5% in the year as a whole. Let me remind you that a year ago, we projected economic growth in the range of 2 to 3%, with central projection at 2.5%. At the same time, we projected that due to the planned implementation of investment projects, growth would accelerate to the range of 3 to 4% this year, with central projection at 3.5%, the same as in our current forecast. We expected economic activity to gather further momentum in the coming years, and have now revised up our GDP growth projection for 2025 and 2026 to the range of 4 to 5%. Thanks to a powerful improvement in the external position in 2023, the current account deficit was much lower than projected a year ago. It measured only 2.6% of GDP, reflecting an improved energy balance and robust growth in manufacturing and services exports. The inflow of foreign direct investments climbed to a new all-time high of 4.5 billion euros. As a result, FX reserves rose to a new record high of over 25 billion euros at end 2023, topping all reserve adequacy metrics. It is equally important that FDI inflow fully covered the current account deficit for the 9th consecutive year, and even exceeded it multiple times in 2023. Later in the conference, we will present recent macroeconomic developments and our new projections in more detail. As I highlighted at the start, inflation continued to slow in the final quarter of 2023 to 7.6% at year-end. This is half its level a year ago and somewhat less than we anticipated in our November projection. Inflation's continued slowdown was propped up by the dissipation of cost-push pressures and the base effect from food prices, as well as by the effects of past monetary tightening, which also supported core inflation's decline to 6.5% year-on-year in December. Inflation is expected to slow further in 2024. Under our new projection, it will most probably retreat within the target band of 3 ± 1.5% by mid this year, approach the target midpoint in late 2024, and hover around that level over the medium term. Such inflation movements will mostly reflect the effects of past monetary tightening, softer global cost-push pressures, slowing imported inflation, still subdued external demand, and the expected continued slide in inflation expectations. The new inflation projection is slightly lower than the November projection due to lower global prices of primary commodities and a faster decline in inflation expectations than we projected in November. It is important to note that not only medium-term, but also short-term inflation expectations of the financial sector are now within the target band, and that corporate sector expectations are on a decline as well, which confirms the credibility of our monetary policy. Now I am tempted to say one figure prematurely. This is a figure which is a result of our nowcasting method, but I will try to make it until the end of the presentation. But it is a good figure, I promise. Our decision to keep the key policy rate unchanged at 6.5% in the period since the previous report was underpinned by the projected inflation movements and the transmission of the effects of past monetary tightening to interest rates in the money, lending and savings markets, as well as to inflation expectations. From this time distance, taking into account the movements in key macroeconomic indicators, we may freely say that it is thanks to our monetary policy, which we have tightened at a continuous but moderate and measured pace, that a concurrent reduction of inflationary pressures and inflation's return within the target band over the monetary policy horizon were achieved. And what I want to emphasize in particular is that the negative effects on economic growth were minimized and the financial stability was fully preserved. This is confirmed by the fact that the share of non-performing loans in total loans has remained at its historical low of around 3%, underpinned by a robust regulatory framework and a carefully designed mix of monetary and macroprudential policy measures. A good example of such policy is our September decision to cap the interest rate on variable rate housing loans at 4.8% for first-time home buyers. This decision has had no major impact on the bank's financial result and does not fuel inflationary pressures, but it has helped to alleviate the credit risk and preserve financial stability, and to an extent supported the recovery of personal consumption. That we have managed to achieve the so-called soft landing by pursuing an appropriate monetary policy is also confirmed by GDP growth, which measured 3.8% year-on-year in the fourth quarter of 2023, or around 1% seasonally adjusted relative to the previous quarter, according to our estimates. Such GDP movements are consistent with the source preliminary estimate, which places GDP growth in 2023 at 2.5%, and with our November projection. Economic growth was led by elevated activity in all production and most service sectors. An almost equal impetus came from industry, construction, and agriculture. On the expenditure side, the key impulse is estimated to have come from net exports due to the real growth in goods and services exports and a fall in imports in the first half of 2023, as well as from fixed investment. To a lesser extent, growth was also supported by personal consumption, which rallied in the second half of the year, mostly reflecting real wage growth due to inflation's slowdown and fiscal incentives. The acceleration of economic activity in the second half of 2023 will make it easier to achieve the economic growth rate projected for this year, and the carryover effect from 2023 is estimated at 1.5 percentage points. Taking into account this and the accelerated investment cycle implementation, we expect GDP growth to pick up to the range of 3 to 4% this year, with central projection at 3.5%. We revised up our growth projection for the next 2 years to the range of 4 to 5%, having in mind the investments planned in the lead-up to hosting Expo 2027. In our estimate, personal consumption will remain an important growth factor this year, reflecting the preserved labor market and the continued rise in households' employment and income, but not to an extent that could fuel any major inflationary pressures. Another important growth factor are investments, private and government, which raise the potential output. Private investment growth will be supported by reduced inflationary pressures, preserved investment confidence, increased corporate profitability, and the expected high inflows of foreign direct investments. Substantial government investment in transport, energy, and utility infrastructure has been planned, as have other projects recently presented by President Vučić as part of the Leap into the Future Serbia Expo 2027 program. As a result of increased export capacities, ensured energy security, and lower global energy prices, the current account deficit declined to a mere 1.8 billion euros in 2023, measuring 2.6% of GDP at the annual level, this being the lowest deficit on record. According to our projection, the anticipated pickup in the investment cycle and the associated import of equipment and intermediate goods, which will greatly be offset by the rise in export capacities and recovery of the euro area's external demand, will result in the current account deficit trending at around 4 to 5% of GDP this year and in the medium term, which is sufficient to ensure the country's external sustainability. We are still projecting its full coverage by net inflows from foreign direct investments, and we expect that in nominal terms, inflows to Serbia over the following years will maintain last year's record level that equaled 4.5 billion euros.
As for foreign direct investment, I would like to underline that year after year their inflow remained diversified, both in terms of project and geography, and was mostly channeled to tradable sectors. For 9 consecutive years, it covered the current account deficit, thus contributing to stronger appreciation pressures and driving foreign exchange reserves further up to around 25 billion euros at the end of 2023. They're even higher now, whereby they ensured the coverage of more than 6.7 months' worth of goods and services import. In addition to capital inflows on account of the most desirable investments, foreign direct investments, and lower country risk premium, another confirmation of foreign investors' confidence in Serbia's macroeconomic prospects is the high demand of foreign investors for the 8-year dinar government bond issued this January and sold in the record amount of more than 63 billion dinars. Investor demand was also high in early February when additional 8-year dinar securities were sold in the amount of 41.5 billion dinars. Against the backdrop of prevailing appreciation pressures and in order to maintain the dinar's relative stability as a key pillar of financial stability, business certainty, and investment and consumer confidence, this was the 6th of the 7 past years that we ended up as a net foreign exchange buyer in the interbank foreign exchange market. In 2023 alone, we bought nearly 4 billion euros net and more than 9 billion euros since 2017. I believe that these results, achieved in a turbulent time where adverse political and economic developments are intertwined on the global scene, are a clear proof that the measures and activities undertaken in the past period by the National Bank of Serbia and the Serbian government are producing results and confirming that we are steering our economy in the right direction. We have not only preserved our macroeconomic stability and shown resilience to the negative effects of external shocks, but also secured favorable growth prospects in the long term, as well as Serbia's status as an attractive investment destination. Our economy's resilience is also underscored by the relevant international institutions that monitor and assess economic policies in other countries, as well as by rating agencies that have kept our credit rating at a step away from investment grade. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, in the remainder, I will give an overview of the factors from the international environment which will dictate inflation and economic movements going forward and, by extension, affect our future decision-making. Firstly, it is important to note that global inflation is retreating faster than anticipated and is approaching pre-pandemic levels thanks to the effects of past monetary policy tightening by the majority of central banks. As a result of lower inflation, we can expect leading central banks to start trimming their interest rates, and some inflation-targeting banks in the region have already started this cycle. Still, the IMF and other relevant international institutions have warned rightly that central banks should take a cautious approach when deciding to start trimming their rates so as not to give rise to renewed inflationary pressures. We still see pronounced risks that may result in inflation in many countries trending higher than expected and slow down its return to the target. At present, the biggest source of uncertainty is geopolitical tension, which was exacerbated early this year when the transport of oil and other commodities through the Red Sea and the Suez Canal was brought into question. So far, this has not had a major effect on the price of oil and other primary commodities, which were lowered due to dampened demand from China, but it did reflect on the cost of overseas transport. Due to uncertainty, we did not base the movements in global oil prices solely on oil futures, which indicate a lower level late this and in the following year than the one currently held, which additionally confirms how cautious we are. When formulating the assumptions to our projection, we took into account the projections of relevant international institutions, which expect the global oil price to move between $80 to $83 per barrel. We note that our new assumptions on the global price of oil are lower than the ones stated in the November projection. Other risks from the international environment seem to be lower than last year. Also encouraging is the fact that the IMF has revised up its global growth projection for this year by 0.2 percentage points to 3.1%, and that it now estimates global risks to be balanced instead of skewed to the downside. As for the economic activity in the euro area, our key trade partner, it practically stagnated in the second half of last year, which is why the growth forecast for this year is somewhat lower than 3 months ago, though it is still higher than in 2023. According to the projection of the European Central Bank, the euro area's economic growth will measure 0.8% this year, which is similar to the IMF's forecast. In view of all of the above, the National Bank of Serbia will continue to monitor and analyze trends in international commodity and financial markets and make future monetary policy decisions in relation to the pace of inflation slowdown and movement of its key factors, as well as the assessment of risks, which are, for the time being, assessed as symmetric for both inflation and GDP projection. We will maintain caution in our decision-making to ensure sustainable movement of inflation within the bounds of the target tolerance band. We will monitor and assess developments in the international environment, as well as central bank decisions, and monitor their effects on our economy. But we will not, as we have not done so far, we will not look up to anyone else or copy anyone else's solutions. We are aware that there are no shortcuts to success, and as so far, we will be prepared for different surprises that might arise from the international environment, and we will make decisions in the general interest. This is the only way to ensure that our economy thrives in optimal conditions for efficient functioning, competitiveness and profitability, further rise of employment and wages, and by extension continued and accelerated progress of Serbia and better lives of all our citizens. Before I give the floor to Savo, I wish to share good news with you and display how our nowcasting model is functioning perfectly. Here we have Mirko and his young colleagues who are at the same level as the Serbian Statistical Office, and after the latest inflation figure for February, 6.54, we projected it to be around 6.5, but it will probably be 6.4, and the latest data available to us, and which we expected to occur in a month later, show that inflation will be 5.5%. So from 6.4, we are going down to 5.5, and this is this secure territory of the downward trajectory of inflation, which will enable us to make decisions which are in the interest of all. I wish to emphasize once again that these are our models, and assuming that there will be no major surprises from the international environment that could affect our current projections. Thank you for your attention, and I'll give the floor to Savo Jakovljević, General Manager of the Economic Research and Statistics Department.
Thank you, Governor. I would just like to give several details more regarding inflation movements and our new projection. Our new projection is rather similar to the November projection. Year-on-year inflation ended 2023 at 7.6%, which was lower by 0.4 percentage points than our November projection. Inflation outturns were, in general, somewhat lower than projected by us, and the main reasons behind were this faster decline in food prices. So if we look at the entire 2023, the key factor behind inflation's slowdown were food prices. Their contribution decreased by 4.8 percentage points. At end 2022, they contributed 7.5 percentage points to inflation, and at end 2023, their contribution was cut to 2.7 percentage points. That is the key reason behind lower inflation outturn. When it comes to core inflation, the contribution is lower by 1.6 percentage points, and when it comes to the contribution of energy prices, the contribution is lower by 1.1 percentage point. Typical for the second half of 2023 is that we have seen a major decline in inflation growth. The main factors behind this were a good agricultural season, but also the decline in the prices of energy prices and raw materials in production, but also the effects of fast monetary policy tightening. Because of all these factors, inflation decline stepped up in the second half of 2023. In the first half of 2023, the consumer price growth came at 5.9%, and in the second half of the year, it amounted to a mere 1.5%. Also, very important are vegetable prices, which cumulatively declined by 16.1% from July to December. If we look at prices within core inflation, in the first half of 2023, they increased by 4.2%, and in the second half of the year, they increased by 2.4%. So all inflation components in the second half of the year registered a decline in their contributions and a slackening in their growth. What are our expectations for the coming period? The Governor already pointed out all the major factors. In the short term, we expect the continuation of the decline in year-on-year inflation rates at a similar pace as in late 2023. We expected to enter the target tolerance band in mid-2024 and to move below 4.5%, in fact. We expected to stay at that level until the end of the projection horizon, and that is in the next 2 years. When it comes to average inflation in this year, we expect inflation to amount to 4.5%, which is only slightly lower than what we expected in November. Namely, then we expected 4.6%. It's practically the same, but still somewhat lower. So we reduce our projections from one report to the next. The factors that will drive inflation decline in the coming period are the same as in the year before: fast monetary policy tightening. Of course, when it comes to import prices, the tightening of monetary policy by the ECB also plays a role, because average inflation in the euro area is expected to amount to 2.7% this year. and the easing of global cost-push pressures will also work towards inflation decline and a reduction in imported inflation, and the drop in inflation expectations, which also affect a part of prices which sellers incorporate in accordance with their expectations. And this is a part that monetary policy can impact to a large extent. So if we look at these components through figures, this year we expect a reduction in the contribution of core inflation by 1.7 percentage points. We also expect lower contribution of processed food prices and fresh meat by 1.4 percentage points. We expect a smaller contribution of administered prices by 1 percentage point and a lower prices of fruit and vegetable prices by 0.6 percentage points. I just wanted to give you an overall picture of the contribution of inflation components to inflation's decline. So you can see that all of these components are on a downward trajectory. What's important to note is that global developments pose the major risk to our projections. We have seen a sharp increase, but temporary increase in overseas container transport. Then the situation with transport and shipping in the Red Sea and the Suez Canal, this was brought into question at one point, but the container transport prices are still still significantly below the maximums attained in 2022. We expect that administered prices increased by 10.9% in 2023. We expect them to increase by around 5% this year, so their contribution to inflation growth will be significantly lower because there will be no electricity or gas revisions. When it comes to domestic risks, the agricultural season features prominently here, but we project a 10-year average of the agricultural season, and this is something that has been assumed in our projection again. Other domestic factors concern infrastructure projects, a rise in consumption, but this rise will not produce any inflationary effects. In any case, we judge that the downward trajectory of inflation is unquestionable. There are no such risks that could jeopardize the downward trajectory of inflation. And we have covered these risks in alternative scenarios, which you may look into in our inflation report.
Thank you, Madam Governor. As the Governor pointed out in her speech, in 2023 we had a record low current account deficit. This was supported, among other things, by export growth, despite the challenges that facing exports. Here we refer to slower euro area growth of only 0.5% in 2023 compared to 3.4% in 2022, and the mild contraction of economic activity in Germany, which is our key trade partner, and this contraction was amounted to 0.3% in 2023. Despite lower external demand, goods export was 27.9 billion euros, which is up by 1 billion euros or 3.7% relative to 2022. Within goods export, close to 90% is manufacturing export, which in 2023 amounted to 24.7 billion euros, which is higher by 1.3 billion euros, that is 5.4% relative to 2022. Here we are talking about the value of exported goods, which includes the effects of higher prices of these goods and higher quantities. We try to isolate the effect of the quantity by deflated the figure of value of exported goods with the index of industrial product prices for exports relating to manufacturing. And according to our assessment, on average, the real quality export in manufacturing increased by around 1% in 2023. In more than a half of manufacturing sectors for which we have data available on the prices of producer prices, we had an increase in quantity exports. Here, in particular, we have the exports of metal products, electrical equipment, motor vehicles, other machinery and equipment, pharmaceutical products. The conclusion is that such results and such resilience of our exports are supported, as the government highlighted, by foreign direct investment inflow, which has been at record high levels from year to year and has been mostly channeled to tradable sectors, mostly manufacturing, and which has also supported growth in our export base. So this expanded export base, together with the recovery in external demand, will make it possible for us in the current year to project real export growth. So both this year and that this trend will be maintained over the medium term and even become accelerated as external demand rallies. That is that.
I would like to present the conclusions of one of the text boxes in this issue of the report, where we compared our projections and their outcome, our projections from a year ago, and we compared them with the projections of the relevant international institutions such as the IMF, the European Commission, the World Bank, EBRD, and Consensus Economics. When it comes to GDP growth, back in November 2022, we projected GDP growth between 2 to 3%, with the central projection at 2.5%. And this projection has been maintained until the end of the year, and it has fully materialized. Only in August last year, due to the unfavorable tendencies in the euro area, when the second half of the year was expected to see recession in Germany, we indicated that GDP growth might converge closer to the lower bound of the 2 to 3% range. However, as our economy showed a significant degree of resilience to reduced external demand, in November we returned to the 2.5% projection, which eventually came true. When it comes to the projections of other institutions, they mostly forecast 2% GDP growth, and they revised their projections during the year downwards. The governor already explained our projection for this year, so we expect GDP growth to grow from 3 to 4%, with the central value at 3.5%. In the second half of the year, we expect growth to amount to around 3 to 3.5%. And we all agree that growth in the coming period will be led primarily by domestic demand, thanks to the accelerated investment growth. When it comes to inflation projection, back in November 2022, when there was a high degree of uncertainty in the international environment, primarily in terms of energy prices, global energy prices, other energy products, and primary commodities. So even back then, we claimed that inflation in 2023 would be half the level recorded in 2022, and this came true. At end 2022, it was 15%, and it was cut to 7.6% in 2023, which is half the level, and we were the first institution to project such inflation trajectory. When it comes to our expectations for this year, the governor already elaborated on our projection. So we expect inflation to amount to 4.5%. which is slightly lower than projected in November. Other institutions also expect the downward trajectory of inflation to continue, but they envisage somewhat higher average inflation than we do. But as you could already hear from the governor, our most recent developments and the projection for the first months of this year, it is quite likely that our projection will come true. When it comes to the current account deficit, in November 2022, when the energy crisis was in full swing and the energy prices were rather high, and when energy supply for Europe was brought into question, we all had relatively large projected current account deficits for 2023. But as the year moved on and as exports continued to grow at high rates, primarily owing to investments from the prior period, which were channeled mainly into tradable sectors. So already from mid-2023, we projected that the current account deficit in 2023 would amount to 2.5% of GDP, which fully materialized. So the deficit amounted to 2.6% of GDP. What we want to emphasize here is that our projections for 2023 have fully materialized, which attests to the credibility of our projections and the credibility of the National Bank of Serbia. And this also explains the fact that the medium-term expectations of the financial sector are anchored within the target tolerance band, and the short-term expectations of the corporate sector have also returned within the target tolerance band of the National Bank of Serbia. Thank you, Mira. Yes, this is most important, not only for our credibility, but also for the future of all of those living and doing business in Serbia and those intending to come to Serbia. That is why we are pleased, not because our projections proved right, but because our projections have materialized, and that is why I was able to share with you the data on inflation nowcasts, which are based on artificial intelligence. So data speak for themselves, and they point to the secure path of inflation declining in the period ahead.
Now we are open for any questions that you may have. Voja Stavanović, N1. I probably misheard. 6.4, 5.5. This is data for January and February, right? January and February. Yes, this is the estimate. And we expected this 5% to occur in March. So I have two questions. First, I would like to hear if you've conducted this analysis. Why are food prices so high in Serbia? If we look individually, if we look according to Eurostat, they're higher than in the countries of the region. Before I give a specific answer related to food prices, this question will be answered by Savo, but in my introductory speech, I intentionally said that our inflation is specific. We do not print money. We had no monetary policy measure, quantitative easing, purchases, or anything that happened in the world, and we did suffer the consequences of such innovation coming from the international environment. But even when we were surprised by the imported inflation, which from the very first day I characterized as such with my associates, we took different responses. We do not look up to anyone. We do not copy anyone's measures, because we have our objectives, and we have to adjust our measures to the objectives which we want to achieve. Our objective is to have a sustainable living standard for our population, and we do not wish to stifle growth, which is a measure against which everything else is compared. And for you and for those who always ask, why is it that we have higher inflation now than someone else? Or why prices in our country are higher than in some other countries? In order to provide the right answer, we wish to present a chart. This is something I'm preparing for Kopaonik, but because of you who ask the right questions and who wish to get the right answers, here we have the specificities of Serbia, which reached the inflation peak, which was lower at a different time and which had less rigid measures, and which, by taking over the burden of higher energy prices, facilitated the living standard for households. And this is why the trajectory of growth of such inflation, but also its return within the target band, are completely different. So no two countries are alike, no two persons are alike, and they do not have the same heritage, the same circumstances, ways of financing, consumer conduct. Also, we have different climate conditions. We will speak about agriculture later. But I have to add that, yes, we do have food prices which are higher than in some countries of the region. And this refers to many products. And this is why, at the time, we brought up the discussion about margins. And I'm happy to state that all retail chains with which we cooperate responded and came to discuss this matter, and no one was angry with us for bringing up this matter. But we spoke of margins, markups in the retail trade, but not in the wholesale trade. We told them that their negotiating power is the greatest, but also that their margins are the most visible. You will get data about the extent to which, as a result of the government's initiative of better prices and as a result of what we, as the National Bank, were doing, and they were very happy to discuss this matter with us using specific data. And we see here that the trend of declining inflation is to a great extent thanks to the consensus regarding the fact that inflation is not good for anyone, that this is a short-term benefit that will produce long-term damages. We will all make an effort to make sure prices are lower. I have another question. The second question refers to financial sector expectations, which you mentioned. And also you mentioned possible reduction of interest rates abroad. What is your estimate of interest rates of commercial banks this year? Sava will discuss food prices first. When it comes to food prices, the governor provided a good part of the answer, but yes, there are some factors that influence the fact that in some branches we have prices which are higher than in the region. We had 2 drought years, which should also be taken into account. There were also subsidies to the agricultural sector, which have increased greatly over the recent period and which will produce the effect in the coming period. It is also important to know that food prices in this period of 1.5 to 2 years of elevated inflation was broadly the same across all countries. So if at some point we'd had really high growth rates of food prices of over 20%, but now we point out that food price growth at end 2023 was 8.4%, which is really much less than the figures we used to have. And a similar trend, it was more pronounced in some countries and less in other countries. And the base is also important here, because the base effect for these prices can impact higher volatility, because in some areas, when you have a good agricultural season, prices go down. If there is a drought in another year, you have higher prices, so you have these year-on-year rates which are much higher or much lower. So this can also be one of the factors behind this. But this inflation was sustained in food prices in other countries as well. We included in our analysis 18 countries, and food inflation in most of these countries, the exception is 5 countries out of these 18. So in most countries, food inflation is still above headline inflation. In most countries, it is still above 5%. So this is a general story that was typical for this period, and that was guided by increased costs since the outbreak of the crisis, the outbreak of the Ukraine conflict, where energy prices went up, mineral fertilizer prices and other raw material prices went up in agriculture. But throughout this period, like today, it is cheaper for me to go to Vienna, Hungary, or Croatia to buy products. It is really so. It is cheaper to go there. What are you buying and where are you buying? Even here, if you're buying in a small shop or you go to a big store, there is a difference. The same thing happens in Croatia, Slovenia. And this relation is constant. Food is expensive here. So from my own personal experience, I can say that food is expensive. Are margins the key reason for this? You should ask food producers and they will not agree with you. They will say that the price is too low and that it is not sufficient to cover their costs. If you watch television, you will see an interview with the producer, frequent interviews, and producers say, this is not cost effective, we will spill milk. What is profitable and what is the sustainable price? This is something that the market determines. We can speak with retail chains, we can obtain specific, precise data from them. And the most precise data there is published in the Business Registered Agency, where they have their annual result and where we can see their costs and their income and how they were generated. But this uniformity or these equal prices of food prices here and somewhere else is not realistic to expect. I'll go back to you and I. We, for instance, are interested in food prices. Some young, good-looking girls are interested in clothes prices, so they can say, you can go to the USA and you enter their outlets and you can buy branded products at very low prices. And then you have those people who go to Pandorf, Austria, and buy at extremely low prices. So the question is, what is cheaper for whom, and who is able to go somewhere? That is, whether with our economic policies and measures we are giving an investor, producer, sustainable climate for doing business. Lidl is not much more expensive or cheaper than others. We obtained data that they're all around the same level with regard to prices. You might be surprised by the following fact. Can you buy bananas in any of these retail chains at a cheaper price? That is hardly, because there is only one importer in the Netherlands who supplies bananas to entire Europe, and you cannot negotiate with them. So we have one practical example. You're talking about food, and I will refer to Nivea products, which we all like to use because we believe in German quality, tradition, etc. They have a single importer. Again, I might cause some reaction by talking about this. And when traders try to be direct buyers from Nivea in Germany, they get the reply that they need to respond to the documentation requirements prescribed here, which are so stimulating that merchants have to give up on their attempt to be direct importers of Nivea products. And one Nivea deodorant, the same product, we got the picture, the prices. This is not, we have evidence for this, and it is €4 more expensive in Serbia than in Germany. And this is not the case in one store. This is the case in all large stores that we discussed. So what I'm trying to say is that competition and the way in which, those non-customs barriers where trucks wait on borders for a long time. So all this is a way to stimulate someone to preserve their market, that they would be the only ones who are doing this job, and everyone else would have to buy from them. You are younger than me. At the time when the first books were written about market economy, it was clear that by supporting the finances, first of all, but also through other measures that are implemented by governments, their economic policies, some areas can be encouraged and some can be thwarted. And this is why the saying, give me the power over money, and it will not be important for me who writes the laws. That is why this saying holds true even today. Once you have entered into an exclusive contract, this person will reluctantly withdraw from the part of the market where such person is the monopolist and it does not allow competition. Your conclusion is excellent. The first time we discussed this, we referred to analysis of the Competition Protection Commission, and it was conducted in 2017. So what we are discussing here is an essential problem, monopoly and competition.
For instance, you now will not eat sugar because it is harmful for us, but we cannot stop using sugar. But there are some people who make jams and have to use sugar, and you know how high the margin on sugar is, and it is no longer economically justified at all. And then who is called upon? Sugar producers. So until we put all cards on the table and see who has the costs and what is the size of these costs, and while trying not to be a command economy, because you will tell me where the government interferes, that things are not functioning well. You will tell me that the perfect hand of the market has to work its way, but this is easier said than done. Our country is a combination of liberal economy, of socialism, where banks were bailed out since 2008 with government funds. And you can call this whatever you like, but this is a kind of socialization of losses and monopolization of profits. So we know who is gaining and who is losing. We know that the brunt of the 2008 crisis was borne by the taxpayers. And to get back to your question, the monopoly and lack of competition, at the time we didn't have good accounting policies. Then we didn't have IPOs in the stock exchange. And sooner or later, we had to face the bust cycle, and everything had to come to us for payment. So, Voja, if you can tell us where we can find the cheapest products, please do. But you keep forgetting the cost of travel to Austria, to Hungary, to Croatia. We are not all, we cannot all afford the possibility to go there. So a large number of people cannot travel and go there where products are cheaper. So not everything is like bananas or Nivea products. There are other products too. I'm living for Serbia and I come from Serbia, but I have to say that domestic retail chains, and two of them also engage in production of own meat and sale of meat, they have shown much greater responsibility than some others. And that is why I will always be precise in answering questions. If you ask me whether monopolies have to exist somewhere between the private and the state sector, I will always decide on the state monopoly, because the state is much more responsible. And if I have to make a choice between competition and monopoly, this is not possible in railways, in transport, but in these fields competition is the only solution. But competition, which is not an empty word, but really giving the chance to access the market and the consumers. And I would like to also explain an interesting practice, because we're in the habit of meeting representatives of retail chains. You get an announcement of price lowering, you photograph that lower price tag, and then you get at the cash teller and they tell you, no, this is a mistake. And then you say, well, I saw it in the newspapers or somewhere else, and then they tell you, no, it's a mistake. And they try to charge you much higher than announced in the advertising. So this is what I'm referring to. We do not have any sense of respect for ourselves or for consumers, for the buyers from whom we live. Because this is no longer shrinking inflation, buying yogurts in a smaller packaging, or buying yogurt with a lower amount of fat, buying chocolate with a lower percentage of cocoa. We are talking about cheating the consumers, and I think that the competent authorities should do their share when it comes to this. Here with us is Bojan Terzic, who is the head of the Department for Financial Services Consumer Department, and he knows how to prevent some unfair practices. And recently he appeared on TV and talked about frauds and card abuse, opening M-banking apps without two-factor authentication, so no one can fool around with us. I know that some fraudulent actions have been compensated for by some banks because they didn't have sufficient safeguards to protect their clients. In 2015, Bojan will remind me, the National Bank of Serbia used 47 billion dinars. No, 6 billion dinars, I forgot. When we will check this later on. So the total profit of banks has been returned by the National Bank of Serbia to clients who were making losses because of the exchange rates banks applied. We returned this money to clients, just as with this latest measure of ours by capping the interest rate on housing loans. We did not make any savings for ourselves, but for clients, and we helped establish a relationship of trust between banks and consumers. The ECB's interest rate hikes pushed the rates on housing loans for some clients to lofty levels, and this may be immodest, but if other institutions did what we do, as soon as we perceive something unfair, we respond promptly. Bank Supervision Department, the Financial Services Consumer Protection. Of course, we discuss all this with banks who are aware that it is more useful for them to work in a conscientious and fair manner with consumers rather than lose them. Because nobody wants to lose clients, nobody wants clients to switch to other banks. So let me wrap up. We agree monopolies are not good. We want competition wherever possible, and we should not remain silent about some phenomena that we see. I cannot not mention my Seneca. If you see an improper behavior, you have to react. You have to bring that person back to the path of normalcy. Do you have a house? Yes. So the house is yours. You did not have to take out a loan. No, I didn't. And did you do any favors to anybody? Do you owe any favors to anybody? So one day this house will have to repay that loan. And then the friend was silent. So we have to be the people who do not have any debts toward anybody, so that we could raise the right questions to those who deserve those questions. And when we bring a matter forward, we have to see it through. But what can you do? Some have the stamina to do this, others don't. This requires knowledge, persistence, and I would like this persistence to be present everywhere, at least to an extent that we have it. That's why I was not concerned much about all the attacks regarding merchant margins, because my intention was not to harm anyone, but to raise awareness that short-term profits are long-term losses for all of us. Because, you know, we have one life, and in Rome they do not say he passed away, but he lived. And this he lived means to live honestly and to work in the interest of citizens.
When it comes to your second question regarding bank interest rate, before we answered that question regarding our expectations for the coming period, I will shortly refer to the past movement in interest rates. We raised the key policy rate by 5.5 percentage points to 6.5%, and our latest key policy rate increase was in July last year. Prior increases in the key policy rate were also followed by the increase in interest rate on banking loans, and before that the money market interest rates, and through that the lending rates of banks. But what is important to note is that there were no additional excessive increases in these interest rates, but this increase moved in line with our increases of the key policy rate, so the banks did not additionally raise their margins. Interest rates on corporate loans increased by 4.9 percentage points, and in late 2023 they were 8.3% when it comes to new dinar loans to corporates. And since from July we kept the key policy rate on hold. In the past months of last year, they even slightly decreased by 0.3 percentage points. Also, interest rates on household loans also decreased over the past months of the year because there were some promotional activities by certain banks, particularly with regard to cash loans. So this stabilization of interest rates in the money market, which resulted from the fact that we did not tighten our monetary policy further, also resulted in a mild downward adjustment of interest rates on dinar loans. When it comes to FX indexed loans and interest rates on these loans, they increased also to the extent to which the key policy rate of the ECB went up, Euribor, from July 2022. So interest rate on corporate loans was around 7% late last year, and on FX indexed loans to households, it even decreased based on our decision to cap the interest rates on housing euro index loans. When it comes to expectations for the coming period, first of all, in this segment of euro index loans, we can expect these interest rates to move in line with the policy of the European Central Bank. Expectations and assessments of other institutions are that the ECB will enter the cycle of key policy rate cuts from the middle of the year, and according to some estimates, this decrease would come to 75 percentage points. So we expect this to spill over to lower interest rates on euro index loans at home. When it comes to our monetary policy, you have already heard from the governor that we are guided by a principle of caution, that we do not look up to others, and that we will calibrate our future decisions. The good thing is that inflation is going down in line with our expectations, and it is declining even somewhat faster than we expected. And over the monetary policy horizon, which is the first quarter of the next year, we expect inflation to retreat to target, assuming no further shocks from the international environment, of course. Let us move on. You can see we are taking good care of banks. Although they record a high profit, the bulk of this profit are interest from transactions with the National Bank of Serbia, which withdraws excess liquidity in order to regulate inflation. And on the other hand, we bear the most of this cost, and this remains within the system itself. It does not go out to the market. It stays on the bank accounts, and it stays with us in repo auctions, where I have to say that their earnings, there is a disproportionate difference between income from higher interest rates in the euro area. Here I'm referring mostly to housing loan, and the disproportionately low prices that they offer on both dinar and FX deposits of households. They should invest this in lending activity, which is not stagnating, is not going down, it is going up, but it would be better to offer to people who have deposits an increase in interest rates, which is proportionate. We have landed on the moon. We know all about science, computers, intelligence, but we cannot change human nature so easily, because greed has been and has remained to this day the main motive. And Joseph Fouché understood a long time ago that the smell of money is much more attractive than the smell of blood. And this quote dates from the French Revolution.
I have two questions. One of them is related to the relevance of the exchange rate, which is managed and floating, but is actually pegged. How important it is for the achievement of monetary policy objectives. And the second question regarding the dinar in Kosovo, what would be the foreign exchange outflow if the Pristina authorities insist on this decision, because they have blocked our exports which equaled 2 billion euros and is now below 200 million. Can this have a negative impact? How will the payment transactions work? Until recently, we didn't have payment transactions with Montenegro. Is there a possibility for a bank from here that has its branch offices here in Serbia or in Kosovo, can it assume the role of performing payment transactions without us recognizing the independence of Kosovo? You have offended us to a great deal because you said that our exchange rate is fixed, that it is backed. Managed floating exchange rate is what we implement, and no one ever said that it is a fixed exchange rate. It is relatively stable, but I will not use Nicola's time. He will answer this question. I will answer your second question regarding the use of the dinar in Kosovo. That is the most important question of all. We will not come out with solutions that are impossible to implement. While this conference is ongoing, the Henderson asset vehicle has been returned. This is a company that we have a long-standing agreement, and this company provides cash-in-transit services, and all the details of this agreement and of the procedures are known to the so-called provisional Pristina authorities, because the seat of this company, Henderson Company, is in Pristina, and they are familiar with every detail. They know the amount of money, the dynamics of transport, and the destination of that money. Because of their decree adopted on the 27th of December, today's second attempt of Henderson vehicle to supply dinars to Serbian and all other citizens, because the dinar is a regular currency in Serbia, they were returned from the administrative line. They were not even allowed to approach the administrative line. This is why I used the phone a while ago. This is not a technical issue. I thank you for your question, and I thank all the well-intentioned people who wanted to talk to us and who wanted to listen to us and who wanted to ask whether there is a way to overcome this issue. But this is not a technical issue. It is a political issue. It is a matter of dialogue, and it is not a matter that can be resolved by the National Bank of Serbia only, because the National Bank of Serbia is a part of the institutions of the Republic of Serbia. This is not a question for the governor of the central bank, because I'm a civil servant. I work for the Republic of Serbia, because the dinar is the official currency in which pensioners from Leposavić, Mitrovica, from any part of Kosovo can receive their pensions in, just as they can receive their pensions in the currency that they decide on, the pensioners from Sweden or any other country in the European Union, if they are temporarily in some other country, or if they have returned to their domicile countries. But if this does not apply to Serbia, but if the euro is imposed on Serbia, this means that there are no legal grounds to do that, but that this is a kind of violence. And any attempt of finding a technical solution is basically using the insufficient information of interlocutors who are promoting and supporting, some openly and some in a less open way, the administration of the Central Bank of Kosovo, who prohibits the use of the dinar in the territory of Kosovo and Metohija. Because if the decree adopted on the 27th of December defines its Article 38 to 34, 28 to 34, that the dinar can be seized from anyone, anywhere, that you need a license to transport the supply, of course, the license issued by the Pristina authorities. And what happens with the license of Henderson Company, which already has a license? So why hasn't its vehicle been allowed to the territory of Kosovo and Metohija? Now, all stories about facilitating access are much more dangerous, and I will not discuss them in detail because I am a member of the Republic of Serbia's team led by President Vučić and Mr. Petković. They're investing huge efforts to find a solution. We are not talking here about the right to issue the euro. No, this is illegitimate use of the euro. We're not talking about an attempt to facilitate everything for citizens or to control the flow of dinars which are transported in some bags. This is offensive for the National Bank of Serbia as a part of the Republic of Serbia, which has regulated all this in detail, and all the details of the procedure of transporting dinars have been reported to the Pristina authorities, so everything is known. We did not ask for a license to supply dinars to the territory of Kosovo and Metohija. So this was the legal framework which is in place even to this date, but is violently being annulled. And the alleged transition period, but you cannot call this in other words, but call it what it is, and that is the expulsion of the dinar. Of course, President Vučić, with the wholehearted support of the whole team, will try to resolve this. So please let us not talk about something that is not a tactical issue, but essentially a political issue and an issue that should be resolved through dialogue. I don't want to end this story here, but I will do my best. If somebody today hasn't received the dinars that they're entitled to, the social benefits, pensions, income, these people have to buy medicines, they have to buy bread. If they cannot do that, what alternatives do they have? What will they do? What are these people offered? Exchange offices. Buying facilities in the north of Kosovo to work as exchange offices, and then they will again find another excuse. The dinar is being represented as an irregular currency that can be used only as a store of value. So it can be used to save with Kosovo banks. And when you want to withdraw your balances, you can do so, though Kosovo authorities are not entitled to have a central bank at all. And then they can seize the money that you wish to withdraw from your bank account. We're in a rather difficult situation, and I find this very difficult personally. No, Stefan Zweig said, I was born in a country that no longer exists. And I say, I was born in a city that they want to call Vuštri and not Vučitrn. And I'm a governor who has to settle for technical talks that is for something that is basically the annulment of sovereignty, of the country's sovereignty. I will do my best, I assure you, together with all those people who are really fighting to show to the world all the bad intentions and the ultimate goal of this measure, which boils down to the following. Let me have the power over money, and then I don't care who writes the laws of a country, because when you do manage the money and the cash flows, you manage the lives of people. And I hope that the contacts of the President, and I thank all international factors, especially some ambassadors who wanted to hear all the technical details from us, the technical details regarding the previous arrangements and what changed now. I have to thank the US Embassy and the Embassy of Japan, who wanted to hear all the details, then the UK Embassy too, which wanted to understand this, and I asked them to help us resolve this matter, because the outcome of these measures cannot be good. I apologize for taking too long to answer your question. It is even more difficult for me. You know, when somebody mentions the dinar to me, and we are celebrating a very important jubilee this year, 140 years of the National Bank of Serbia, that has its own currency and that is still not a member of the euro area. So members of the euro area use their right to have their pensioners receive their pensions in the currency they choose. You know, it is the cheapest thing is what you can pay for money is the cheapest, and not everything can be paid by money, and not everything can be bought, just as you cannot buy people in Kosovo. And when you starve them out, and when you leave them in such a situation, I will not talk about this anymore. I'm sorry.
When it comes to the exchange rate, the official exchange rate regime is the managed floating exchange rate, and this is a fact. We have to be very specific on this matter. We cannot talk about a fixed interest rate, because it means that we are defending a certain exchange rate level at any cost, and this is not something that the National Bank of Serbia is doing. What the National Bank of Serbia has been doing for over a decade is the relative stability of the exchange rate. You asked the question why this is important. The two key objectives of the National Bank of Serbia are monetary and financial stability. So price stability and financial system stability. The exchange rate stability as one of the key pillars of both of the above-mentioned stabilities is important for the achievement of both these objectives. The best example of this is probably in the past year and a half, where we had this imported inflation, a global phenomenon of imported inflation, and there are some countries in the region which allowed their currency to weaken and had inflation of over 20 to 25% year on year. We'll not name these countries, but we will say that the stability of the exchange rate in the time of elevated imported inflation and depreciation pressures is why imported inflation was not higher in our country, and this is one of the instruments used by the National Bank of Serbia in order to make sure that inflation is on a downward path. And the second factor is financial system stability. Governor, in her introductory address, said that we have this credit risk, which in some previous period, that is foreign exchange risk, which spilled over to credit risk through NPL increase in the prior period. Now we have a low level of NPLs, which make up only around 3% of total loans. So this is also important for the stability of the financial system and for the depositors. And we published a fact yesterday through some of our analysis where we compared dinar savings to FX savings. So from period to period, dinar savings are more profitable, and one of the key reasons why it is more profitable is the stability of the exchange rate as part of the overall economic and macroeconomic stability. So take into account all segments of the domestic macroeconomic environment, the certainty of doing business where companies can be focused on their core business, that is, on their core activities, basic activities, without having to take care of whether some potential exchange rate differences will impact their business in a more significant way. So now we have a certain business environment for both domestic and foreign investors. Are there any more questions? Vesna Bielic-Blitz. In the light of green transition, an increasing number of banks are announcing green loans. Is this possible for consumers? Will you support this? Is our market ready for such a kind of initiative? This question is very important for all central banks, but it is important to note that we should not follow trends just for the sake of following trends. So green financing is something that has been increasingly discussed in the past 2 years, and the National Bank of Serbia is part of the international initiative for greening the financial system together with other central banks, and we're included in all activities. It is very important that there is this unified taxonomy, that is global regulation, which contains precise definitions of what green financing is, and international regulators are coming closer to that solution, as it will bring certainty in this segment of operations. In the National Bank of Serbia, we have to say that a part of foreign exchange reserves has been invested in some green instruments, if we can call them that. So that is the instruments of other international institutions which issued, but these are prime instruments with a high level of liquidity and security, as this is the principle according to which foreign exchange reserves of this country are managed. And it is very important to point out that we will keep a close eye on all these trends, and when global consensus is achieved, will not lag behind. What monetary policy has enabled in the prior period is that through the required reserve system, some loans provided by international financial institutions, which have been reinvested under more favorable conditions, under more favorable margins relative to regular loans. So these loans are treated more favorably from the aspect of required reserves. So this is a benefit for end users of these loans, and that is the corporate sector. Vice Governor Ana Ivkovic and Nikola Dragašević are greatly engaged on this matter with their associates, and we do not lag behind any trends. We are the leaders in the area of digitalization and state-of-the-art instruments of modern digital and other technologies, but even here we stand on a par with other participants in this process of greening the economy, which is really necessary. But we do take care of the fact that social changes have to be gradual in order to be sustainable. Another good thing is that many of these conferences are taking place online, so many of our associates can participate in them and learn about the latest trends in this area. Do you have any further questions? Yes, Henderson was threatened that they will be arrested. They were told to move away from the administrative line, or otherwise they would be arrested. They're also offering digital channels of account opening to our citizens, because they know how many people cannot access the tellers of postal offices. There are rural areas where post officers bring pensions to to people. But it is interesting where this gentleman can promote this idea, and it is really a terrible situation.
Milena Antonijevic, Euractiv Serbia portal. I wanted to ask you about the situation in the real estate market, and what are your expectations for the coming period? Will our citizens be able to afford buying apartments? Let me tell you, the situation in construction industry is not as awful as you can hear in some TV shows where they say that apartments are bought mostly for cash, and that the percentage of credit-funded purchases is on a decline. Construction is one of the industries that will give the largest contribution, in addition to transport and transport infrastructure, to the GDP growth next year. And whether the prices per square meter have reached their maximum levels, or whether they will stagnate or fall, this is something that we are not that entitled to talk about. I think this is the question for real estate agents and traders, but what's important for us is that in lending activity, we do have a significant share of construction as an economic sector, which means that the demand for apartments is still large. Prices have almost stabilized. They grew at a slower pace in the last quarter of 2023, but what I'm interested in is lending activity, which recovered in the industry, in the construction sector, and continued recording high growth rates, which means that we are not worried about construction prospects. Its contribution to GDP growth is unquestionable. But prices, real estate prices, are something that we cannot discuss. You've seen the situation in the States. Some expected that the Fed would start lowering interest rates already in March, but they were surprised by inflation volatility, which bounced back, especially core inflation. But since in the United States, financing via issuing shares is much more interesting than taking bank loans, as opposed to Serbia, where the system is banco-centric. They have already incorporated a decline in interest rates and prices. What I want to say is that there are countries with long tradition of capital markets where the markets actually guide the Fed's decision, and there are some central banks which steer the markets, the banco-centric system, to be harmonized with the decisions taken by an independent and sovereign Central Bank of Serbia, which has at its heart the interest of citizens living in Serbia. So the construction will give a contribution to GDP growth, and what real estate prices will be like will depend on the purchasing power of households. I hope that all those who said that inflation had eaten into wage increases will lose the arguments for that, because you all have the inflation report now. You can check with us and with the statistical office. And I hope that the increased purchasing power will not give rise to the price of square meter, because we know what affected the price rise in the real estate market. We know what happened in Russia and Ukraine, but these trends are now abating, and we hope that real estate prices will decline. What I'm worried is something else. Nobody asked about it, but I have to say it. Have you noticed the tendency that as soon as a building is constructed and the apartments are not moved into, but the ground floor is already rented by a casino? You're interested in apartment prices, and I am interested in the rentals which are being raised by casinos and betting houses. And in this way, they are boosting the rental prices for some other businesses. And these casinos use the metrics allowed by law to the metrics of distance from kindergartens and schools. This is what I'm worried about. And the practice in Albania is also very interesting, where they closed casinos even in five-star hotels. Fortune is very important in life, but work comes above everything else. So in this respect, we will do our best to promote work and true values, and not relying on fortune or some other, so to say, unsafe sources of means for living. Thank you very much for your attention. See you in 3 months.